Another thing I think as Muslims we should think about as a dimension to this, and talking about this, I want you to tell me what your thoughts are. Can something like this be a catalyst maybe to bring the Ummah together? Because we're seeing the failure of nation states. Can this be something that says, hey, listen, being brought together on a set of principles, virtuous principles, is far greater than try to align yourself on some of the tools of nationalism? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, subhanAllah, it depends, because a lot of people now, as you pointed out earlier on, they seem to now depend on their government more. They're looking to the government to solve all their problems. As to whether unity of the Muslim Ummah, this would encourage unity, I think first and foremost, this will be a shock to the system. That many Muslims think that, it's sad that Yemen there's poverty, Yemen there's war. That's very sad, and we'll make dua for them. And then, but in the meantime, they go back to doing selfies of their coffee mugs or coffee on Instagram or what have you, right? This actually brings to the fore in our minds that this, death can go into any of our doors at any point in time. Travails and tribulations can reach us anywhere in this world that Allah desires it to reach us. And the fact that I believe that you're going to witness maybe a complete failure of protecting the people in many of the countries in the Muslim world who don't have the same industry, who never really thought about building that kind of industry. Their healthcare systems are really subpar, substandard due to corruption, due to the natural wealth of the population being squandered on a minority. You're going to see that this dissatisfaction, depending on how much it spreads in the Muslim community and how disastrous it might be. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that that's not the case, that the Muslim communities throughout the world, the Muslim majority countries, experience the lightest of touches. I also make dua for anyone else, for all other people around the world, not just the Muslims, to also who haven't experienced it yet, to also just get the lightest of touches of this pandemic. But that being said, my dua notwithstanding, my supplication notwithstanding, if it does happen that the case, then you're going to see perhaps some realization that the Muslim Ummah needs to get its act together, and it's not getting its act together because it's not being driven by a worldview, a unified worldview and purpose that would organize this kind of stuff. In our history, the Muslim world has dealt with plagues and pandemics. The formation of the Bimaristan concept, the idea of in Persian it means the house of sickness, or for sick people. Hospitals basically with separate wards, so you don't actually have this contamination of different patients in all put into the same ward, which was a bit of a bit of hasana, so they say, a positive innovation. This stuff was done because in the Muslim world, the obligation, the Muslim world united and driven by Islam, they saw the obligation to basically that the ruler would be asked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala how he looked after the people according to the deen. The people expected their ruler to fulfill the obligations and duties that the deen prescribed upon him, upon them. And so Muslims developed waqf institutions for treatments, for what's they called, inbuilt pharmacies, which are actually for not only treating inpatients but outpatients too in hospitals. These things Muslims developed and of course the plague, the bubonic plague, obviously did impact the Muslim world, but arguably in many areas not as much as Europe at the time, where 60% potentially of the European population were being wiped out, despite the fact that it's actually it's not so hot in Europe, and it was carried by fleas and rats, and you'd expect that in hot countries perhaps vermin would be more conducive to the replication of vermin, and then taking out fleas. And I certainly know that I encountered more fleas in like places like Spain and Portugal in hotter countries than I would in North Europe, right? Just my anecdotal experience, of course, and of course, and here's one obvious thing, though this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually true. In a caliphate, you'd get rid of one of the major sources of infection, which is pigs. basically, right? Pigs, the pigs are petri dishes, not just for viruses and or pathogens, but they are ideal candidates for recombination of different viral strains to create chimerical strains which have a mixture of different from avian background, bat backgrounds, a whole number of different backgrounds, and that can have a higher risk of infecting human beings. And so if you didn't have pigs to the large quantity that you do, if they're removed as part of a staple diet for the population, there's that. But also you'd also have the Islamic duty to care and be considerate for animals, and you wouldn't have the kind of industrial, very callous capitalist mass farming and mass animal husbandry practices that you do, what you see in the West, where they just focus on increasing supply as much as possible, and they cram birds into these warehouses, and cows and cattle, including pigs, of course, and they don't focus on them being healthy or being free from disease. They expect it. So what they do is they mass inject antibiotics and other antiviral treatments into all the animals, because they expect that they're all going to get sick, or they're going to spread it. They live in disgusting conditions. They walk in their own feces. There's no measure to clear it out. And so what you get is not only a perfect place for the spread of contagion, but also to develop resistance against antibiotics and certain antivirals, because the bugs that basically make out of these petri dishes are the ones which are resistant. And you've exacerbated that, you've accelerated that acquisition of resistance by kind of just blanket medicating all the animals, whether they're sick or not, just giving them antibacterials, antivirals, and so on and so forth. And so maybe the price of meat and chicken in an Islamic system, Islamic ruling system, would be a bit more expensive, but you'd be healthier. And besides, I mean, as you know, because I know you have a lot of medical knowledge, eating red meat a lot isn't actually one of the best things for the health. I mean, it's good, a bit of lahma, a bit of for our kebabs and meat pakore, but ideally it's actually should be had a bit more sparsely and mixed with with greens and fruits and vegetables, and of course white meat, as they say, chicken, poultry is good, but you can have free range, and it might be a bit more expensive, but and therefore not as often. But our ancestors lived like this. The Prophet Muhammad didn't just have meat every day because it was expensive, and people lived healthier lives.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.